For nearly 3 decades, the empire had known only one name whenever victory was mentioned: the general. No one spoke his real name anymore. It had disappeared beneath a title earned through blood, discipline, and impossible victories. Children grew up hearing stories about him. Soldiers swore loyalty because of him. Kings delayed wars because of him. Entire nations surrendered after hearing only one rumor: the general is coming. 40 battles, 40 victories, not a single defeat. Military scholars filled libraries attempting to explain his brilliance. Some believed he possessed unmatched intelligence. Others insisted the gods themselves guided his decisions. His enemies claimed he could predict the future. His soldiers believed something simpler. They believed he could not lose. The empire rewarded him accordingly. His banners flew beside those of the emperor. His armor was forged from steel reserved only for legends. Poets immortalized him in songs before he had even grown old. Every victory brought greater honor, greater influence, greater fear. Yet inside the military camps, another story quietly existed, a story the songs never mentioned. The general was feared just as much by his own officers as he was by his enemies. One mistake during training could provoke an explosion of rage, a delayed report, an untidy formation, a poorly sharpened sword. Any imperfection could ignite his temper. Veteran captains learned to speak carefully. Young officers avoided meeting his eyes. Messengers rehearsed every sentence before entering his command tent. No one questioned his leadership, but few found peace in serving beneath it. The general believed fear created discipline. Discipline created victory. Victory justified everything. At least, that was what he told himself. Every evening, after inspections ended and thousands of soldiers gathered around campfires, celebration filled the military camp. Men laughed, shared stories, played music beneath the stars. But the general rarely joined them. Instead, he studied maps beneath the dim light of oil lamps, always searching, always preparing, always imagining another enemy beyond the horizon. Victory had become an addiction. The moment one battle ended, his mind demanded another, because the silence made him uncomfortable. Stillness felt dangerous. Rest felt like weakness. His officers admired his determination. None recognized the fear hiding beneath it. On the night before the empire's largest campaign, the camp stretched for miles across an open valley. Thousands of tents stood beneath a sky filled with cold stars. Horses stamped impatiently. Blacksmiths repaired armor through the night. Scouts came and went carrying reports from front. Everything moved with perfect military precision. The general walked alone through the camp. Soldiers immediately stood as he passed. Heads lowered. Conversation stopped. Respect followed every step. Yet none of it reached him. His attention remained fixed upon tomorrow. Tomorrow's battle. Tomorrow's victory. Tomorrow's proof that he was still the greatest commander alive. As midnight approached, he finally entered his command tent, the largest in the entire army. Inside stood maps covering enormous wooden tables. Small carved figures marked enemy positions. Letters from the emperor praised his past victories. New orders awaited his approval. Everything reflected control. Everything reflected certainty. Yet sleep refused to come. The general sat alone. His hands rested upon the map. His eyes remained open. The same question returned, not spoken aloud, only whispered somewhere deep inside him. What if tomorrow is different? He immediately dismissed it. Cowardice. Nothing more. He had conquered 40 battlefields. Why fear the 41st? Yet the question returned again. Quieter, heavier, more persistent. Outside, rain began falling across the camp. Drops struck the canvas roof above him with slow, relentless rhythm. He closed his eyes. But instead of sleeping, he remembered faces. Soldiers who had died following his orders. Cities burned beneath his campaigns. Young officers publicly humiliated after making honest mistakes. Victories, always victories. Yet none of them brought peace. Just another campaign, another map, another enemy, another mountain still waiting to be conquered. Before dawn, a disturbance spread through the camp. A traveler had arrived alone. No horse, no escort, no weapons, only a weather cloak covered in dust from distant roads. The guards laughed. What kind of fool walks into a military camp before a battle? The traveler answered calmly, the kind who has no enemy here. The guards searched him. Nothing. No hidden blade. No message from another kingdom. Only a worn leather satchel containing books. Word eventually reached the general. His first reaction was irritation. We are preparing for war, he said coldly, not hosting philosophers. His officers nodded in agreement. One captain suggested sending the old man away immediately. Another proposed imprisoning him until after battle. But curiosity interrupted the general's anger. Bring him. Moments later, the old traveler entered the command tent. He neither bowed nor showed fear. His eyes wandered across the maps, the weapons, the banners, and finally rested upon the general himself. Not with admiration, not with hostility, simply observation. The silence between them felt strangely uncomfortable. The general finally smiled, a smile carrying more pride than kindness. So, he said, you've come to teach soldiers about war? The old man answered without hesitation. No. He stepped closer to the enormous battle map. I came to meet the man everyone believes cannot be defeated. The officers exchanged amused glances. The general folded his arms confidently. And now that you met him? The traveler looked directly into his eyes. His expression never changed. I am no longer certain they were describing the right battle. The tent fell silent. No one understood what he meant. No one except the old traveler. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. The command tent remained silent. Outside, thousands of soldiers prepared for the battle that would likely be remembered for generations. Horses were saddled. Armor was tightened. Spears were stacked beside burning campfires. Every man in the valley believed tomorrow's victory already belonged to the general. Inside the tent, only two men seemed completely uninterested in tomorrow's battle. The general stood beside the enormous campaign map. Across from him stood Friedrich Nietzsche. Neither spoke. The silence stretched long enough for it to become uncomfortable. Finally, the general laughed. A confident laugh. You've heard the stories. Nietzsche remained still. I've heard enough. The general smiled proudly. Then you already know. I have defeated every army sent against me. I have expanded an empire. I have never retreated. I have never lost. The officers standing nearby nodded in agreement. These were not boasts. They were facts. The general expected admiration. Instead, Nietzsche slowly walked toward the battle map. His fingers rested lightly upon the wooden table. Then he asked a question so simple that everyone in the tent expected the general to answer immediately. Tell me, who commands your anger? The general frowned. I do. Nietzsche nodded. Good. Then stop it. The general's expression hardened. My anger serves me. It keeps my soldiers disciplined. It keeps my enemies afraid. It wins battles. Nietzsche looked at him for several long moments. Then, without raising his voice, he pointed toward one of the young officers standing near the entrance. Insult him. The general looked confused. What? Insult him. The officer froze. The general reluctantly obeyed. Within seconds, the young captain lowered his head in humiliation. The atmosphere inside the tent became tense. Nietzsche spoke again. Now, take your words back. The general frowned. I cannot. Exactly, Nietzsche replied. Words release an anger obey no king. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever spoken to the general this way. Yet no one interrupted. Nietzsche continued walking through the tent. He examined the swords, the shields, the armor polished until it reflected the firelight. Everything was prepared for war. Everything except the man leading it. The philosopher stopped beside the general. You believe your greatest weapon is your army. The general answered confidently. It is... Nietzsche slowly shook his head. No, it is your discipline. Then he paused. And every time your anger controls you, you hand that weapon to someone else. The words lingered in the silence. The general immediately rejected them. My anger is under my control. Nietzsche looked directly into his eyes. Is it? The question seemed almost insulting. Before the general could answer, one of the messengers rushed into the tent. He stumbled slightly while entering. A sealed military report slipped from his hands onto the floor. The general exploded. His voice thundered through the command tent. "Fool! How many times must I teach you discipline?" The young messenger fell to his knees, trembling. Every officer lowered his eyes. No one dared speak. The outburst lasted only seconds, but when it ended, the silence felt heavier than before. Nietzsche calmly looked toward the frightened messenger, then back toward the general. Without judgment, without satisfaction, only certainty. He quietly asked, "Who commanded your anger?" The general said nothing. Nietzsche continued, "You answered too quickly. You said you controlled it. But one dropped letter." He looked toward the report still lying on the ground. "Commanded you instead." The word struck harder than any sword, because everyone inside the tent had just witnessed the answer. The general slowly turned away. For the first time in decades, he could not defend himself. Outside, the first rays of dawn began appearing beyond the hills. Trumpets echoed through the valley. Thousands of soldiers prepared to march. Inside the tent, the greatest commander in the empire stared silently at the campaign map, not because he feared the enemy waiting beyond the battlefield, but because another enemy had suddenly become visible, one he had carried through 40 victories, one no army could defeat for him. Nietzsche stepped beside him. His voice remained calm. "You have conquered cities. You have conquered kingdoms. You have conquered armies." Then he looked directly into the general's eyes. "But tell me, what victory have you ever won over yourself?" The question remained unanswered, because for the first time in his legendary career, the general realized he had finally encountered an opponent who could not be defeated with strategy, soldiers, or steel. He had found a battlefield that existed entirely within himself. Dawn finally arrived. The valley that had slept beneath darkness only hours before was now alive with movement. Thousands of soldiers stood in perfect formation. War banners rose with the morning wind. Horses stamped impatiently against the cold earth. Trumpets echoed across the hills, announcing the beginning of another campaign that history would one day remember as another glorious victory. Nothing had changed, and yet somehow everything had, because something had shifted, not within the army, not within the battlefield, waiting beyond the horizon, not within the empire that believed its greatest commander was invincible, but within the man standing at the front of that army. For the first time in 40 campaigns, the general was not thinking about defeating the enemy. He was thinking about defeating himself. The officers approached him, waiting for the familiar speech, the one that always inspired confidence, the one that promised victory. Instead, the general remained silent. He looked across the endless rows of soldiers, young faces, old veterans, men who trusted him with their lives. For years they had believed he feared nothing. They had never seen the battle that happened before every sunrise, the battle against his own anger, his pride, his endless hunger to prove himself again and again. He slowly mounted his horse. The army watched. Across the field, the enemy banners appeared through the morning mist. The moment had come. A young lieutenant rode forward, carrying new intelligence. His hands trembled as he reached the general. The road map slipped from his grasp and fell into the mud. Only yesterday, the entire army knew what would have happened next. The general would have exploded, humiliated the officer, allowed anger to spread through the ranks like fire. Instead, he looked down at the frightened young man, then quietly dismounted. He bent down, picked up the map himself, brushed the mud away, and handed it back without saying a single angry word. The lieutenant stared at him in disbelief. So did every soldier close enough to witness the moment. Nothing about the battlefield had changed, yet something far greater had. The general had interrupted a war that had existed inside him for decades. From a nearby hill, Friedrich Nietzsche watched silently. He did not smile. He did not celebrate, because this was only the beginning. Self-mastery is never won in a single moment. It is chosen again and again. The battle began. Steel clashed against steel. The valley filled with smoke, shouting and thunderous cavalry charges. By sunset, The Empire had won once again. Messengers raced toward the capital carrying news of another magnificent victory. The soldiers celebrated around great fires. The officers praised the general's brilliance. Songs would soon be written. Statues would eventually be carved. History would remember another battle won. But none of them understood what had truly happened that day. The greatest victory had never taken place on the battlefield. It had happened long before the first sword was drawn. That evening, the general found Nietzsche standing alone beside a dying campfire. Neither man spoke for several moments. The general finally broke the silence. I always believed victory meant standing above every enemy. Nietzsche looked into the fading flames. And now, the general lowered his head. Now I see. The enemy I feared least was the one ruling my own mind. The philosopher nodded. For the first time since arriving at the camp, he allowed himself a faint smile. Then he stood, adjusted his weathered cloak, and prepared to leave. The general stopped him. There is one question left. Nietzsche turned. The general asked quietly, "Will this battle ever end?" The philosopher looked toward the dark horizon, where tomorrow's road disappeared into the night. Then he answered, "No, because every sunrise gives your anger another chance to command you, and every sunrise gives you another chance to refuse." The words settled into the silence like the final lesson of a lifetime. The fire slowly faded. The camp grew quiet. The victorious army slept peacefully beneath the stars. And before disappearing into the darkness, Nietzsche spoke one final sentence. "The world will remember the battles you won, but your soul will remember the battles you refused to lose against yourself." The general remained beside the dying fire long after the philosopher had vanished into the night. Tomorrow, history would call him unconquered, but for the first time in his life, he understood that the greatest battlefield had never been beyond the valley. It had always existed within him. And the greatest victory was not conquering 1,000 armies. It was becoming the commander of his own mind.